A weapon designed to take out tanks at a prison seems like something straight out of an over-the-top action film.
Boom!
Jack Walsh's family has lived in this valley for generations, and he knows every inch of this building.
This was the dressing area. They would put up the posters that they used to advertise the plays, and these are still here. They've survived. I would have loved to have seen them in their heyday.
Derby is in the Naugatuck Valley where two rivers come together, and this was really important in the Industrial Revolution because several mills sprung up here.
These mills manufactured everything from hoop skirts to corsets to brass items and pianos.
As the valley boomed, a local rivalry developed between Derby and the nearby borough of Ansonia. A conflict well known to lifelong resident Kelly Santiago.
Derby and Ansonia are friendly, and it's more of a friendly rivalry, a fun competition with the sports teams.
But over 100 years ago, one-upmanship between these neighbors would change the face of Derby.
In 1870, Ansonia, which was then a borough of Derby, built a grand opera house just 2 miles up the road.
Well, not to be outdone, Derby decides it's got to build its own opera house, and they name it after a local piano manufacturer.
This is the Sterling Opera House.
Many of these types of structures were built in the 19th century. They're essentially theaters, but they're called opera houses because of the popularity of musical entertainment. Things like light opera or comic opera.
But below the stage lies a strange, bureaucratic underworld.
This grand, beautiful building was an icon for the town of Derby, but it was also a very expensive icon, so it had to serve double duty.
We're on the main floor, which was actually City Hall. So this is the heartbeat of city government. The mayor had an office next door, the tax collector and the director of charities.
Beneath the abandoned City Hall lies another, much darker level.
These are the jail cells. I think this could have been a nice form of crime deterrent, because take a look at this. If you spent one night in this jail cell with this elegant toilet, I don't think you'd ever want to come back.
These dungeons once held some unique criminals when they were operated as Derby Police Department's holding cells.
The same prosperity that brought the theater to the valley also brought another thing: organized crime.
The Black Hand was a type of extortion racket that was introduced to the United States by immigrants from southern Italy.
This was a group of people who would write letters and extort people. They would write to rich people, often rich Italian Americans, and they would say, bad things are going to happen to you unless you give us some money.
They would send a letter with the Black Hand on the letter. And if you got that letter, your life changed dramatically because you were under threat.
Connecticut's large Italian-American population made it a hotbed for these schemes, and a number of Black Hand extortionists were held within these cells. While this town would eventually overcome the Black Hand, it would not weather natural disaster quite as well.
We've had floods at different points in our history, but the worst one was in 1955. And it came as a result of 2 hurricanes in a short period of time.
Nearly 50 lives have been lost, and for many thousands of people, the catastrophe has been like a nightmare come true.
It basically wiped out the downtown area of Derby. We had coffins washed down from the cemetery, which got hung up on the bridge.
Rumor has it that after the flooding, the city hall was actually used as a morgue, so you would have bodies stored beneath the theater, and maybe that's where the rumors of haunting come from.
While Derby was able to clean up after the floods, the Sterling Opera House was already on its last leg. The theater struggled to make a profit in the 1940s and hosted fewer and fewer performances. The final nail in the coffin for this building came in 1965, when City Hall moved out and the building closed for good. Today, the Sterling Opera House remains empty, but has not been forgotten. In western Montana lies a small town that's past has been dominated by one violent institution.
The building looms large and ominous at the end of the town's one street.
From some angles, it looks like a castle or fort, but from other angles, it looks like a train depot or station. It's not immediately obvious, that's for sure.
One of the buildings feels almost like a theater with this beautiful facade and these impressive columns.
News coming from the facility was of great interest to the local community.
If you lived in Deer Lodge, Montana, chances are you know someone who worked here. That wasn't necessarily a good thing.
This is the Old Montana State Prison. Opened in 1871, it was an attempt to tame the Wild West and rid Montana of the bandits and vigilantes who were leaving a path of death and destruction. For one power-hungry criminal who dreamed of controlling his own prison, Montana State was perfect.
Jerry Miles is what you would call a career prisoner. He spent most of his life bouncing between various institutions.
Miles had heard that the Montana State Prison had fairly relaxed rules, and he thought that it would be the perfect place to fulfill his dream of running a prison from the inside. The only problem was, Miles was living in Georgia as a free man at the time, so he hatched a plan.
He purchased a bus ticket to Butte, which is about 40 miles from here, was promptly arrested for burglary, and then sentenced for 5 years in Montana State Prison.
Miles, despite his history of violent and even psychotic behavior, was placed within the general population at the prison. Now, this was just trouble waiting to happen.
10 months later, his plan to take control of the prison was ready. The heavily outnumbered guards, meanwhile, were ill-prepared.
The 1959 riot, how they think it started was through inmate Miles. They took some flammable liquids and threw on a guard, and they threatened to burn the guard unless they give him the rifle. Rather than be burned up, they give him the rifle.
Miles and his 21-strong inmate mob then rounded up as many prison staff as they could and locked them in the cells.
They took the mattresses off, soaked them in flammable liquids, and left them in there, and they say, well, if you don't let us out, all we have to do is throw a match in there and they'll burn to death.
At about 4:45 a.m. on the 18th of April, 36 hours after the riot had began, the National Guard sprang into action.
This tower here is where they had the National Guard with the bazooka.
Over on the west side, I heard boom.
For the first one hit, which was a little too high. So then they tried a second one, readjusting their aim, and it came down and hit the right side of the right window.
Firing bazookas, a weapon designed to take out tanks at a prison, seems like something straight out of an over-the-top action film.
As Miles and Smart were reeling from the explosion, a team of guardsmen stormed the tower.
Miles and Smart were found dead, the result of a murder-suicide. The guards, taken hostage, were rescued from their cells, physically unharmed but mentally scarred.
A lot of people stopped working at the prison after the '59 riot, but for some, it was a lifestyle that they had no intention of giving up.
The last few decades of the prison passed by relatively peacefully. In 1974, construction began on a new facility on the outskirts of town. And 5 years later, the last inmates at the old Montana State Prison were transferred. Today, the prison has reopened to tourists, with guides like Ray entertaining visitors with stories of the incredible events that took place here.
Deer Lodge has had a long and special relationship with the prison, and I imagine that the residents here are probably pleased that this new chapter is a much more peaceful one.
In Memphis, the city's tallest building was where the movers and shakers partied, until an event that took place just blocks away shook America, changing everything.
On April 4th, 1968, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated at the Lorraine Motel. He was in town in support of the sanitation strikes that were happening all around the city.
There were demonstrations and riots across the country, but Memphis was one of the worst hit areas. Almost overnight, the appeal of the city evaporated for many, and this once bustling downtown area became a spot to be avoided.
Downtown Memphis was devastated, and this building, really, it started its slow decline. Over the next decades, the revolving restaurant managed to stay open, but revenue was down. Downtown really wasn't a place that you went.
With the money in short supply, in 2001 the revolving restaurant turned for the final time. Yet the rest of 100 North Main limped on.
Companies continued to leave, and by 2012, the occupancy rate had fallen down to about 30%.
2 years later, the last resident left, and the doors to Memphis's tallest building shut.
Today, over half a century since Dr. King's assassination, this building's shadow is becoming a symbol of optimism once more. It's something the mayor of Memphis, Paul Young, is hoping will springboard new life into the city.
Part of my campaign platform is about remediating blight in our community, and 100 North Main will ensure that that happens. We're going to see this building revitalized.
Paul's team is planning to turn 100 North Main into commercial units, a hotel, and apartments.
The modernization and reopening of such an iconic building will be a tremendous development in Memphis in terms of revitalizing the downtown, but it's also important in terms of American history, given Memphis's critical place in our culture.
Perhaps one day, Memphians will be able to eat their dinner while admiring the same view that Elvis enjoyed over 50 years ago.
There will definitely be a restaurant at the top of 100 North Main. I'm not sure if the floor will revolve, but this building will be the go-to place for Memphians once again.
The interior of this structure lends few clues to the array of celebrities that walked its halls.
This brick building is totally gutted inside. Why was this one building saved?
You wouldn't know it by looking at this hulk of a building, but this was once an important cultural center for a thriving community.
America would not be what it is today if not for the contributions of people from this particular neighborhood. Stepping on these buildings is a bit emotional. The blood and sweat and tears of my ancestors that built communities like this all across the South.
For his whole life, community activist Ennis Davis has been reviving this neighborhood's place in history.
A lot of my history has been passed down generationally. I'm a sixth-generation Black Floridian. My family, they would share stories with me as a kid. it all started to come together in terms of understanding the significance of La Villa itself.
Even before their time in the spotlight, these buildings were home to a burgeoning black middle class.
Jacksonville has long been a crossroads, situated on the narrowest point of the St. Johns River, and it soon became a railroad hub for the state.
One thing that was distinctive about rail in America is that it was a big employer of black Americans.
Known as shotgun houses, these buildings became a symbol of the workforce employed by the railroads.
On May 3rd, 1901, a fire started just a few blocks away from here in a pile of Spanish moss at a mattress factory.
In a race against time, the fire department struggled to contain the blaze.
Fire got out of hand, wind changed directions, and it literally burned down the majority of what was then downtown area Jacksonville.
In just 8 hours, this fire would destroy 2,000 homes. It wiped out 146 city blocks and left about 10,000 people homeless.
But in the wake of the fire, this neighborhood would undergo a musical renaissance. One building that survived the flames found itself at the heart of it. This is Jennifer's Hall.
This building was built by a guy named Samuel Jennifer in 1895, primarily for use as a grocery store. This building had a bar upstairs called the Lenape Bar, and it was this bar, not the grocery store, that made this building an iconic location in the neighborhood.
There were so many black-owned businesses here, it became known as the Harlem of the South.
The La Villa neighborhood and the Lenape Bar became a crossroads for musical legends traveling through the Southeast. Today, Jennifer's Hall and these shotgun houses stand as mementos of this neighborhood's heyday. In Tampa, Florida, few vestiges of the city's colorful beginnings remain, but Kim Sheridan Dugmore is determined to keep her ancestors' dream alive.
There's lore in my family. We've talked about this place since I can remember. My grandmother would tell me stories, and it was all about this place called Ybor.
Ybor City's history goes back to the 1880s, back when Tampa itself was just a tiny village.
Drew Newman's family first came here to work in the industry that built the city, and they are still the owners of the J.C. Newman Cigar Company.
Cigars are the only reason that Tampa exists today the way it does, and that's what created Tampa's identity.
Tampa became the cigar center of the world.
More cigars were rolled here in the city of Tampa than anywhere else on the planet.
Ybor City became more successful with time and would soon get its crowning jewel.
In 1910, the Regensburg Cigar Company also moved in the neighborhood.
They saw what was happening here in Tampa, and they decided to build what at the time was the largest cigar factory in the world, known as El Reloj, or Spanish for clock. The factory made a lot of headlines as it was being built, and Sanchez and Ehaya saw this, and they bought the land across the street from the factory.
This is the Sanchez Ehaya building. This structure would serve the El Reloj factory and Ybor City for years to come.
This building was the center of the neighborhood. The second floor was designed as a small hotel, and the first floor was a cafe and a restaurant and a bar.
It was the first building in the area to be made of reinforced concrete, which is really smart in an area that's often hit with hurricanes.
Workers from all over the world would flock to Ybor City, but the South was a hostile place for immigrants. To cater to the town's workforce, the Sanchez Ehaya building would have to defy Florida's Jim Crow laws.
The time when different people, different races, different cultures were all very segregated, here in Ybor City, it was a melting pot of people, all living together in harmony, all because they were making cigars together.
Ybor City was a town founded and populated by almost only immigrants, mainly from Cuba, Spain, and Italy, and it was thriving.
As different cultures brought together different ways of life, the Sanchez Ehaya building would unintentionally harbor a growing underworld.
The building was a social hub, so it kind of stood to reason that it would also become a center for the town's less legal activities.
We have stories about how the police raided the building because there was a illegal bolita being played downstairs.
A numbers racket often run by the mafia. Bolita was a game of chance where numbered balls were withdrawn from a bag, supposedly at random.
The problem was, bolita was never a fair game. There were so many tricks that the mob bosses put in order to rig the game. For example, if you put your hand into the bag and you were friends with the mob boss, you'd pick out the ball that was cold, the ball that had been put in the freezer.
In 1962, as a result of the rise of Fidel Castro's government, the communist takeover of Cuba, the U.S. government imposed an embargo on products from Cuba. That included the high-quality Havana tobacco.
Many of the city's remaining cigar factories shut down, and Ybor City's economy plummeted even further.
While the El Rolo cigar factory was saved when it was bought by Drew's great-grandfather J.C. Newman, the Sanchez Ehaya building wouldn't be so lucky.
The hardest time in Tampa's cigar story was really the 1970s and 80s. Ybor City was a ghost town and a lot of the history was lost. When I was a little kid in the 1980s, the building was boarded up, but it wasn't vacant. It was the grungiest of dive bars.
In the early 2000s, the Sanchez Ehaya building closed its doors for good.